Hey everybody, welcome back to the Down South Hunting Podcast. This is Mike Higman, and you are listening to part 3 of our 3-part series on weather-related deer movement. We checked out some GPS studies and what some biologists had to say about it, and this is all presented to you by the Onyx Hunt app. If you have not checked it out yet, it's awesome. You need to check it out. They've got a free trial that you can get at onyxhunt.com, or you can download the app on iPhone or Android. So this is part 3. If you have not listened to part 1 and 2 yet, you need to go back and check those out. Otherwise, this is just going to be one giant spoiler. If you've been listening to the other 2, we appreciate you hanging with us, and we're excited to be wrapping this up today. Next week, we are going to be jumping back into our regular stuff, and we've got some really exciting stuff for you this fall. I can't tell you about it because if I do, inevitably, it won't happen. So just subscribe so you get our next episodes, and I promise you it's going to be good the rest of this fall. This episode, we are going to be talking to Will Brantley, Spencer Newharth, Adam Cruz, and Jeff Genke. And we're going to get everyone's reactions, including mine, to what we've heard the first 2 episodes. I hope you are interested to hear what we have to say about it. And I'm interested in hearing your thoughts as well, so reach out to us on social media and let us know what you think. One last thing before we jump into these interviews, make sure you're checking out huntinggeardeals.com. This is the time of the year. Everyone's getting geared up for season. Hopefully you've been out in the woods some, but you might have realized that you're missing some stuff. So make sure you're checking that out. We've had a lot of deals lately on trail cam batteries and SD cards, camo, ammunition. You know, there's all types of seasons that start throughout the year, and we've got all the stuff you need. Even if you can't think of anything you need, you should be checking it out, because I'm sure if you get on there, you're going to find something that you want to buy anyway. So that's huntinggeardeals.com. Thanks to everybody who's been sharing this. We've been breaking records on every episode we release, so we know that's thanks to you and your loyalty, and also you guys sharing it with your friends. Let's go ahead and get started with this first interview. All right, I've got Spencer Newharth back on the program. We originally did not plan on this. I had not thought the whole thing through when we did our first interview, but I thought it would be really good to bring him back on and get him to share his thoughts. We actually recorded that first part, I think it was like in March of this year. So that was like 6 months ago. So I'm sure his ideas and thoughts have kind of evolved on their own besides the podcast. So welcome back, Spencer.
Hey, Mike. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Excited to have you. So had you been able to look into this any further since we talked? I know we kind of had some back and forth kind of all along about, you know, what was going on and when this was going to come out. And I also know you've started your Rut report, and it's kind of back to the same old ways where basically everything is based on weather patterns. Have your thoughts changed at all just on those things?
No, my thoughts have not changed too much. As far as looking into it on my own, I have not done any new individual research. But yeah, I did launch Rut Fresh in the meantime, and we are now in season 3 of Rut Radio. But through those 2 avenues, it is reinforced the strong link that hunters have with cold fronts and deer movement.
Yes. Yeah. And just based on, you know, just social media and that kind of stuff in between part 1 and part 2 here, it's definitely the overwhelming majority, which is no surprise. You know, feels very strongly that weather has a huge impact. Were you surprised at all by any of the interviews or anything anybody had to say?
When it came to the podcast, one thing I was surprised with is that all these biologists and researchers were saying on the front end that our studies don't show any correlation with moon patterns, weather patterns, anything like that. That I expected, and I was pretty aware of that. Where I was surprised is that they all hedged that by saying, but I'm still a hunter. I have some biases, and I still would pick a cold front over a warm front to hunt. You know, they are as deep into this as anybody. And they still kind of lean that way, that maybe we're missing something when it comes to this research, and I still favor cold fronts.
Yeah, I do think that's very interesting. Nobody was willing to like come out and say like, if you're only hunting cold fronts, you're crazy. You know, you're right. Everybody was kind of hedging, you know, what they had to say. I also thought it was really interesting it seems like almost like an open secret, with biologists that like, yeah, well, everybody says it's, the weather doesn't affect anything. Yet it's something that we really don't hear that much about.
Yeah, and it's like, from my point of view, I still remain skeptical that weather is much of a factor when it comes to whether or not you're going to kill a mature buck. For me, it's similar to how I feel about like moon patterns and barometric pressure and stuff like that. And it's also similar to how I feel about like Bigfoot or aliens. I don't believe in Bigfoot or aliens, but I am enthralled with stories about them, documentaries about them. If someone has something to share when it comes to Bigfoot or aliens, that's captivating to me. And it's the same thing when it comes to people talking about deer movement and different factors. I read all of the moon guides. I love checking out when people are predicting an early rut or a trickle rut or whatever it might be. I'm a sucker for that stuff, and I still read it even though I am not convinced of it. And that's still how I kind of feel about it. I'm not convinced that weather plays much of a factor, but definitely still interested. And I'm open-minded enough that if the right study came along, I would happily be wrong and be like, that's awesome. That's another piece of the puzzle when it comes to, deer hunting.
Yeah, and speaking of just guides and that kind of stuff, is the Drury's came out with the Deercast app, which I think is going to be really cool, regardless of which side you fall, in these beliefs, to look at when you're hunting and see what their Deercast has to say. Mark went through a whole litany of different things that they evaluate when they're looking at hunting and what's good and what's bad. And he's probably one of the only people in the world that can keep track of all those different variables. But they've put it into an app, and basically they rate it from poor to great. So, you can compare for yourself and compare what they believe and what it says it's going to do versus what your actual observations are.
Yeah, and that's a good example of where, even though I just said all those things, that I'm not convinced those make much of a difference. I've downloaded that app, and I love plugging in, different hunts and stuff and looking at it. And that, changes some of my views on certain days of hunting as well. And I think that, like, it's still okay to have a feeling about weather affecting deer movement, even if it turns out that that's not the case. Say 100% we know weather does not affect deer movement, but you still believe that. That's all right, because I used to be this way. If a cold front was coming through, I was going to get in my best stand. I was going to get there plenty early. I was going to sit later in the morning than I would otherwise. I was more confident. I was more alert. I wasn't picking up my phone. I was in the best mindset I could possibly be, because I was thinking that this cold front is going to make a difference. And that is, peak hunting. You are going to be successful if that's your mindset and the opportunity comes up. So these people who still feel super strongly about cold fronts, that's all right. That's going to make a difference in their hunting for sure.
So how does weather impact the way you hunt practically, or not impact it? Like, what variables are you looking at when you're deciding where to hunt?
Well, I am a huge hypocrite, and I hunt cold fronts. Even after I say all that, if there's a day coming up, say it's like, November 3rd, it is hot, and November 4th, it is cold, I'm going to hunt the cold day, and I'm probably going to be tucked in really close to that bedding area, and all those things I just said. I'm going to be more confident, and I would, rather hunt those cold fronts than warm fronts. Yeah,
that's really interesting. One last thing, I think everybody can kind of do some of their research on their own too, not just relying on their memory. But I think we all probably have piles of trail camera pictures. It's easy to go back and look at temperatures and that kind of stuff and see if there's anything we can pattern. Mark Drury, obviously, they study those a lot, and he says they all point to moving more in the cold. So we can all do a little bit of research on our own in our in our exact hunting grounds. We don't need to worry about where these studies were done.
Yeah, and if I was like ranking the different factors when it comes to buck movement or mature buck movement, number one, I would say stage of the rut. I think that's an obvious one. Like if it is November 10th versus October 10th, you absolutely have better odds of killing a mature buck. I think everybody would agree on that one. Number two, I would put it hunting pressure. If you are someone who has to hunt a lot of public ground, you probably have better odds of killing a mature buck midweek versus a weekend, or maybe the second weekend of the season versus the first weekend of the season. Or if you are hunting on the private ground next to that public ground, your odds of killing a mature buck probably go up as well. Third, I would put food sources. I think that is really important. The crop status, whether things are being harvested right now, or if silage just came out, or if there's a huge acorn crop, if apples are falling, whatever it might be. I think that is a really important one as well, that you can make some, really important decisions on based on locally what's going on with those different food sources. And then after that, I would say it would be weather. But if I was putting those things in tiers, like I would say tier number one is the rut stage, tier number two would be that pressure and food sources thing, and then below that in its own tier would be weather. After that, everything else, the pressure, moon phases. But that's just my feelings on it.
So tier three, is that like may or may not matter?
I would say matters and affects my decision making, but not as important as those other, three things.
All right. Well, thanks so much for talking with me and getting back with me after listening, and thanks so much for helping me come up with this idea in the first place. Can you just tell us again about what Rut Fresh is, and tell us about Rut Radio as well?
Rut Fresh is my new blog that launched here in July. It is where a lot of my writing lives when it comes to things about tips and tactics, wild game cooking, journaling, things like that. And then it also serves as a place to go and get deer reports. There are new deer reports that come out every few days from, I'm just looking at the site right now. We have reports from Kansas, Missouri, Nebraska, New Jersey, South Carolina, all over the country. And that is from outside sources who will tell you things like what stage of the rut they think it's in, what they think the current buck movement is, what they project buck movement to be, and then some details on why they feel that way. If they think the moon phase is important right now, or if crop status is going to change some things, if the good cold front is coming in and they think it's a better time to be in a tree stand, whatever it might be. So it's really ironic that I don't feel strongly about a lot of those things, but I still produce all these different reports like this. The other thing is Rut Radio, where you're now in season 3 of that, and I think we are through 3 episodes already. Those will be going on from now until January. So those come out every Wednesday. Same kind of idea. I talk to hunters across the nation for about 5 minutes, and we discuss some of those same things when it comes to current buck movement and projected buck movement.
So we'll have to get Lindsey Thomas to do some hunting and come up with a report so we can hear about how weather doesn't matter from him.
That's right. It's he's good for one of those about once a month.
Yeah. So. Well, thanks so much, Spencer. I appreciate it, and good luck the rest of this hunting season.
Thanks, Mike.
I've got Will Brantley back on with us, and we're going to talk about his thoughts on part 1 and also part 2. He was able to listen to that as well before I released it. Will, have you been out hunting again since we last talked?
Yes. Yeah, hunted. I think I've hunted the last 3 evenings in a row. So my wife actually shot a nice big doe night before last in kind of a drizzle post cold front afternoon.
As I was going to ask if your pattern held true in the early season where you want more consistent weather.
Yeah. Well, and like I told you last time that we spoke, I mean, when I speak of our early season here in Kentucky and the need for that consistent weather, I'm speaking even earlier than most people are thinking about. I mean, I'm speaking about when deer are really truly on their summer pattern still, when they're still wearing their velvet, because our bow season opens the first week of September. I actually consider really anything after about September 15th to be, I mean, it's technically still early in the season, but you're kind of starting to depend on those fronts and things after that. That real stable weather that I was talking about in our first interview, that's something I really kind of just apply to that first week or so of season, really until they shed their velvet. And then after that, things change pretty fast. So yeah, by this point in the year, late September, those cold fronts become pretty important to us.
Yeah, that does make a big difference. Once they are shedding their velvet, then I can see how the changing patterns would make a big difference. So let's get into what the podcast is about.
Sure.
Were you surprised at all about what the findings were? I think I may have, hinted at it a little bit during our first interview. But were you surprised to hear what the biologists had to say?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, it runs contrary, obviously, to what virtually, any seasoned deer hunter would tell you. I listened to Mark's interview with you earlier today and got a kick out of it. He was pretty fired up and into it. And I'd pretty much tend to feel the same way that he does about it. I mean, after a lifetime of deer hunting experience, and not only my own hunting experience, but how it is as an outdoor communicator. Not only are you relying on what you've learned yourself, but you're also relying on what you've learned yourself to be able to ask the right questions of people who know more about it than you do. And so a whole lot of my work is spent in, interviewing experts like Mark Drury and hunting guides and things across the country. And almost universally, people will tell you that weather plays a huge impact on deer movement during the hunting season. And so, to hear that and then hear the results of the studies. Yeah, I mean, it is a little surprising. Now, that said, I also, in the course of my work, have interviewed a lot of biologists and looked at a lot of scientific studies and things about a variety of different topics. And very often what the data will tell you is not always, it doesn't always match what you observe out there in the woods. And, I think it was Bronson Strickland who mentioned in his study that there's a difference in, recorded movement and, movement that hunters can observe. And, I don't have the answers as to what all the magic, factors are that make deer get up on their feet. I don't think any of us do. But I do think that there probably is a difference in, whatever movement it is that they were able to record through these surveys and the type of movement that hunters can observe. Maybe it's some localized movement in and around a bedding area as opposed to movement in a transition zone around a food source, et cetera. And so I guess that's what, that's if I were going to try to rationalize some of those findings to myself, based on the data, which I don't doubt, and based on what I've seen as a hunter, I guess that's how I would try to explain it to myself anyway.
Yeah, and really it's hard to pick apart these studies without actually looking at the studies and seeing the data that they pulled out. Or just kind of take these guys at their word as far as how deep they looked into it. And I think Stephen Webb mentioned as well, we're talking about are they moving, but not so much where they're moving. So, are they milling around their bedding area, 50-yard radius versus moving out at a different time? To me, it seems pretty clear that the distance of movement is pretty close to equal regardless. But I'm not sure, are they talking, 7 o'clock versus 7:15 versus 7:30? There's definitely, we don't really know that. They might, but just, based on the podcast, we don't exactly know that.
Yeah. Well, and it's those could all be, huge differences in the grand scheme of things to a hunter. And, I like to look at, really kind of any hunting situation. I mean, what you're doing as a predator is just trying to put all of the odds in your favor of, intercepting that deer. And most of the time, you're not going to be successful. But the guys who are more successful at it, they've learned to pick apart all of those little pieces, weather, moon phase, time of the season, etc., and plan their ambush around that. And so, the way that a deer moves, from point A, his bedding area, to point B, a major food source, is probably going to look a little bit different than the way that they might just get up and loaf at midday. And you know how it is. You'll be driving down the road and Might be 11, 12 o'clock in the day in the summertime, and you look up and there's a deer standing out in the field. You're like, oh, that's kind of an odd time for a deer to be up and moving. And sure, they'll get up and stretch their legs, I think, throughout the day and move around and nibble a little bit, whatever they're going to do. But is that a pattern that a hunter can exploit and kill that deer? Maybe, but not nearly as likely as that early morning and late evening pattern, that real true bed to food source pattern or whatever it is.
Yeah. Could you possibly see a study being able to convince you otherwise? Like if they were to, create a GPS tracking study and meet some specific criteria, could you see that changing your mind? Or do you feel like so sure about what you know that you don't really see anything possible to change your mind on it?
I mean, I kind of feel like that's an answer in search of a problem. It would be interesting as an outdoor writer, outdoor journalist. It would be interesting to see that. I would, gladly report on that, probably with some skepticism. But it would be interesting to see and read it. But again, a lifetime of hunting experience and a career's worth of interviewing, people who I would argue know more about deer hunting than really anybody before, guys like Mark Drury and so many of the outfitters and just top end resources that we have out there. They're all going to tell you that cold fronts are something that hunters need to pay attention to. And I just can't imagine a study really convincing me otherwise of that, or convincing many of those experts otherwise of that.
Yeah, and I was trying to think of maybe in another example of something that maybe hunters believed for a really long time, and science has kind of like proven that to be wrong. And while I think there are some examples of maybe some myths, nothing like as strong or as like widely believed and for so long as deer moving with cold weather.
Oh, sure. There have been studies on the October lull, for example. I've always kind of believed in the October lull. I mean, in my experience, I think I mentioned it last week, you get a full moon in the middle of October, kind of between the early season and the pre-rut. It's universally tough hunting. At least it is around here. It's been like that since I can remember. You'll go days on end without seeing a deer, and we have a lot of deer around here. That's pretty anecdotal, kind of my neck of the woods type thinking, and I try to avoid that as an outdoor writer. But at the same time, it's common enough that it's been given a nationwide name of the October lull. So other people are seeing that too. Now, there have been studies that show that deer movement rises steadily throughout the month of October, and maybe that's technically true, but I can just about bet you this year, when we have that full moon in October, the hunting's probably going to be slow, and I'll probably take a week off from it and go fishing or something. So I don't know of any study that would convince me otherwise. And I've heard it argued, well, you're not hunting the right food sources. You're the deer reacting to your pressure, and so many on and on excuses. Well, gosh, I mean, I've put in a lifetime's worth of experience in the woods and hunted, I guess, about every available type of food source in October and kind of seen the same results. So doesn't mean that it's scientifically true. It just means that's what I've observed as a hunter, and probably, has a lot to do with how I'll use my strategies going forward.
Yeah, and I do think regardless of what you believe, whether it comes to the October lull or weather affecting patterns or the moon, I think one of the keys with hunting is just having confidence in whatever you're doing. And the more confident you are, I think the more likely you are to be able to meet whatever your hunting goals are.
Sure. And on that point, I would add one thing that I did take away from the GPS tracking studies was that, sure, there are definitely, my reliance on cold fronts is not to say that I don't hunt on days when the conditions are less than ideal. I've seen and killed good deer on warm days, rainy days, cold days, you name it. And I've often believed that next to the location that you're hunting, persistence is the most important part of it. And I'm fortunate in that I live in a really good area with a lot of deer, and I get the time to hunt a lot. And so even though I still kind of pick and choose my days, based more on wind direction for the stands that I want to hunt than anything, I still hunt a lot. I probably hunt quite a bit more than the average bow hunter, and I think that alone probably leads to a little higher success rate just because I'm out there. And so, although I would rather have that cold front day to go, I'm not going to let a warm forecast stop me from hunting on a day that otherwise the conditions are right. The wind is in my favor to hunt the stand that I want to hunt, and I've got the time to go and so forth. So I'm usually kind of given the choice. I'm going to go because as the old saying goes, you definitely can't kill one from the couch. Yep.
Yeah, no doubt about that. All right, well, Will, thank you so much for coming on. It was really good to be able to get a professional opinion to go along with, some of the average hunters I'm talking to. Not that I'm saying the other guys I'm talking to are average, but they're certainly not professional in the industry type guys. So it was really good to get your opinion on it. Somebody that talks to a lot of very experienced hunters. Is there anything? Where's the best way people can reach you as far as finding your work and that kind of stuff?
Well, definitely Field and Stream or Outdoor Life magazine, or either of our websites or Facebook pages. I've got work in all the above, so that's definitely the best place to follow what I'm up to.
All right. Well, thanks so much for coming on with me, Will.
All right. Thanks, Mike. We'll see you, buddy.
All right, I'm going to welcome back Jeff Genke from The Hunting Beast, and he's had a chance to listen to parts 1 and 2. So welcome back, Jeff.
Hey, Mike. Thanks for having me.
All right, so I'm excited to talk to you about this. I guess, first of all, just kind of give me your initial thoughts. So, you knew I was talking to some biologists and stuff, but you didn't really know what they were going to say. What did you think initially?
It was all eye-opening. I kept finding my opinions wanting to change back and forth depending on what I was hearing and flip-flopping back and forth, and it came down to kind of following what I was doing before. But I did find something really interesting. Someone, I forget who, talked about the moon, and on full moon days that deer travel really did not increase substantially. They noticed a little bit. I wanted to say they saw an increase of what ended up being a few meters of travel extra per day. And I always had it in the back of my head that I thought that with a full moon that they'd be out cruising and covering far more ground at night with that, a little bit more moonlight, taking advantage of that. So that kind of eased a few of my fears or thoughts, because whenever a full moon would come, I just kept thinking those bucks are going to be cruising nonstop all night long, and I'd see a little bit less of that gray light movement in the morning when I get on the stand. So that might help my confidence dealing with those days this fall.
Yeah, I think that was Dr. Diefenbach that talked about. He had one of his students look at the numbers, and he said the bucks moved a little bit more at night, but it basically equated to an extra trip to the bathroom. So it wasn't really
next to nothing.
Yeah. But then I believe all the other biologists that we spoke to actually said they couldn't find any correlation at all. So
right.
I do think one interesting thing with these studies is there was no for sure thing across the board. They all kind of had different things to say a little bit as to how sure they were.
Yeah, I thought everybody was very similar with their research.
Yeah, and it was, I would say, the general theme of things is there wasn't a significant findings that they could see.
No.
So were you surprised by anything else in particular besides the moon thing?
Not really, because if you recall, my belief kind of is hunt any day that you can get out there. We're all pressed for time, and whenever you can hunt, that's a good day to hunt. So I always had the belief that I'm hunting. I'm not going to pay attention to the weather at all. I never have paid attention to it. The only thing I do pay attention to is the wind and the wind direction. And like I said, I really think these deer are a lot like humans. When it's crappy outside, people are going to want to hunker down and wait till a storm passes or something breaks. And like the deer are going to get up and move around before that big storm hits, and they're going to move around right after it hits. And I think a lot of people time their hunts out that way. And They have a correlation of seeing more game at those specific times. And I just think that with that said, I think a big part of it is like confidence. When you're going out there, you're seeing these deer move, and you're only out there on the good days that you're hunting, and you start to think, well, it's got to be a fall day or it's got to be a cold day, and that weather is why I'm having success. And I don't think it is. I think you have the utmost confidence in your results because you're going out there on those days and you're getting it done, and you're only remembering your good experiences, and that's what's, more or less having you go out on those type of days or those weather days.
Yeah, I agree. This is a little bit off of what we've been talking about, but talking about the wind a little bit. Mm-hmm. Is the wind pretty consistent in the areas that you hunt? Like, are you able to believe a forecast that's a couple days ahead of time?
Well, when I go out hunting, I kind of will check which way the wind is supposed to be blowing, but half the time I get there, it's not really doing exactly what they said, and plus taking into account, thermals and then wind shifts and just, cloud cover, everything just changes, so you got to hunt. They might say it's a certain wind, a northwest wind coming over this day, but the time you get to that specific spot, well, something else might be going on right there. So it's kind of like hunt the conditions and what you're encountering at the moment.
I guess a lot of times you might be checking the wind on the way in, and you might have a specific tree or area in mind, but I guess you can shift 50 or 100 yards to hunt the right wind. Might be hunting the same spot, but you're hunting a different tree.
Well, that's a big thing with like hunting beast style. It's, every time we go out into the swamp or a cattail marsh, we're hunting those specific beds on just off winds. The wind can be blowing into that bedding area, or because they're going to bed in that swamp on basically any wind. But what we want to do is we want to put our stand in a way that when that deer leaves, our wind isn't blowing directly at him. It's just missing him. And that can be by 10 feet, 15 feet, 5 feet, as long as he's able to get up out of there and we're on an exit track of that. That's basically how we get it done under those circumstances.
So what were there any specific things that you kind of said that you kind of were going back and forth? Were there any specific things you can remember that kind of made you think twice? You said you came back to what you originally thought, but what were some of the things that you kind of like caught yourself maybe thinking differently on?
I don't know, when Mark kept talking, Mark had some really good experiences, and just the amount of years that he's had to draw from on his barometric pressure and data and weather. I'd love to see some of those like tables, if he's got anything like that, just logged over the decades, just to see like what deer he did see on those days. Because I definitely agree with him. When say a storm does come through, I do believe we're going to see more game before and after. So I just think that I kept going back and forth saying that the weather is what Mark is saying is a good example, opposed to whatever the data was for the other researches.
Yeah, well, okay, so this is what I think is so crazy, and I agree with what you're saying. So I'm gonna go over like what my kind of it's funny. I say final conclusions. I will more say like my conclusions at the moment I talk to him with Adam, because I feel like I'm on one hand I know a lot more about this. And I'm more confident in what I think, but at the same time, I'm more confident in my knowledge of it, but not necessarily in like a final decision. So if I talked to Mark Drury every day or was hunting with him all the time, I guarantee I'd be thinking exactly what he's thinking, because he's got it together when it comes to this.
Start to convince yourself based on who's talking at what moment and what you're absorbing.
Yeah. And if I talk to Lindsay all the time and we talk about the data from these studies, then I would probably think it doesn't matter at all. But I will say all of these biologists kind of hedge what they're saying and say, when it really comes to hunting, that they want to hunt a cold front too, even though the data is all telling them it doesn't matter.
Right.
So I guess maybe I'm finding myself in that same thought process some in, okay, when I look at the paper or look at the studies, then yes, it doesn't matter. But in reality, what am I really going to do when it comes time to go hunting?
I don't know, or is it just that everybody starts to think they're an expert on anything that they talk because they want to come across like they know what they're talking about? I mean, you get out there and why not only, maybe you should just go out there and hunt cold front days and never hunt any other day of the season. Then you're going to basically judge your success on only those days, and then you're going to convince yourself and say, hey, look, I've killed bucks only on the day of a cold front.
Yeah, and I think there is a ton of confirmation bias in all of whatever we believe it at the time. I think the same thing goes through, with a lot of gadgets in hunting is, you have a good experience and you use whatever it was, this scent or this tool or the scent elimination or whatever it is, because you used it that time and you had a good experience, then you equate every time you have a good experience because of that.
That's how I have success. And then when I have success, I've got confidence, and that's the only thing I'm going to believe because that works, and that's just like the old tale of, well, when it's hot outside, deer don't move, what? It's like, no, they move. You just got to be in the spot where they're moving at that time. They're all going to move. It's, is it more because you're hot, you're tired, you're miserable, the bugs are killing you, that you don't want to be out there and you're looking for the excuse to not hunt? Well, then don't hunt that day, and then you're going to believe that deer don't move in the heat, because you don't have that example or success or something to draw upon for your data.
Right. And you know what? Maybe the same thing goes with like early mornings or hunting mornings in the early season. Well, when it's the early season, you may go hunt a morning and you sit in your stand until 8:30, and then you go get your breakfast over because you feel like it's getting too hot. Then it gets to be later in the season, and you're staying in the stand till 12 o'clock. And what do you know? You see more deer when you stay in the stand till 12 o'clock. So,
yeah, there are no absolutes in any of this. I mean, you can always say a big buck, a mature buck's always going to bed in hill country on the point with the wind blowing down the point. But then you know what? The next day you might find a big buck bedded on the wind blowing side for some stupid reason. There's always going to be an exception to anything and everything. And I think we're finding that out with like scent control, with, the weather, anything. And it's just get out there and have your success and totally believe that you can do this on a rainy day, a windy day, a snowy day. And I think when you have that success, then your confidence, you're going to start to believe that, and your kills are going to go back up higher and higher and higher.
Going back to some of what Mark said, the before and after the storm thing, though, something I thought was so interesting is what Lindsay brought up with the studies with the hurricane. Like, I can't think of a more drastic pressure change that would cause, like, I'd think the deer would run around like crazy trying to get ready for the storm, just like people, but
survive, right?
Yeah, I guess they're like, well, I got to eat today, and then I got to find somewhere to bed and make sure I'm safe, from predators. They're really like, it doesn't seem like weather's a really big factor.
Yeah, and if I recall right, he said they didn't really move too much before it, did they?
No, he said the only difference was once the storm was hitting that they saw doe movement more because of flooding, so they're trying to find some dry land.
Right.
So, then they said basically from before the storm until the 2 weeks after, like buck movement decreased gradually because the rut was over. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think what you keep going back to is the best thing, though. Just hunt when you can hunt, and but whatever we can draw on to have confidence, I think is good. Whether that be
I do.
A scent product, or you're hunting a certain weather, or the barometric pressure is dropping, or whatever. I agree with what you're saying, that like we just need to draw on whatever we can to have the most confidence, and hopefully get out there and get what we're after.
I know that sounds kind of boring, probably, Mike, but I just think that, and that's what I've believed my entire life. It's, you know how it is. Time is precious, and anytime you can get out there, if it's raining or snowing or it's miserable or it's a great sunny day or whatnot, take advantage of it.
Well, and as much as we can say it doesn't matter, I'm still going to spend a ton of time trying to figure out whatever, like, the least slightest edge. I'm going to try to figure out what the best things to believe and do, and the tactics and that kind of stuff, even though some of those might not even matter. No. That's just fun. That's the passion we all have for this great sport. Yeah, that's right. So thanks so much for participating in this, and good luck the rest of the season. It was really good to have you be part of this.
Thanks, Mike, and now I'm glad I don't have to worry about that moon shining all night long.
Yeah. If we figured out one thing, that is, and we did get a lot of agreement on the moon stuff. We talk mostly in the weather, but every one of these biologists agreed that the moon had no impact really. But then again, Mark Drury, said, there's certain moon phases that he found different, and I know Dan with the hunting beast, he's not crazy about the moon. But I know he pays attention a little bit. There's certain days he might try to push the envelope a little bit more just because he thinks they're going to move a little bit more. So,
right.
All kinds of stuff we can think and debate about, and the good thing is we're talking about hunting. So
that's what we make lots of notebooks for too. Write it all down.
Yeah. All right, Jeff. Well, thanks a lot for your time, and have a good week and good luck the rest of the season.
You too.
All right, I've got the Adam Cruz back on the line with me. Welcome to the Down South Hunting Podcast, Adam.
Hey, man, it's truly a pleasure to join you tonight and being in this epic series of podcasts. I've enjoyed listening to it, and I've also enjoyed being an innocent bystander that didn't have to do any work.
Yeah, I can't say that I've necessarily enjoyed that part, but I have been really looking forward to having this discussion with you. We've honestly talked a little bit about it, but I haven't got all your thoughts, so I'm excited to hear what you have to say. So give me like your first initial thoughts with it.
First initial thoughts are, I've changed my mind somewhat, not only because of this series of podcasts, but I've actually went back and done some other post research and read some of these studies, looked at some of the information that the QDMA has put out, and I've just thought about it logically. Like, as a hunter, through my own experiences, and then even putting myself in through the lens of a deer and what happens within a deer's life and what a deer needs to survive and why it would move, when it would move. So I kind of go back to some of the things that Mark Drury has said. Mark said that, we all know that they're a slave to their stomachs. That's true. So are human beings. So are all other animals, mammals, whatever. But he also said that deer movement would be enhanced because they need to eat to survive. So when the weather drops to dramatically colder temperatures, say in the Midwest or the Northeast, and they're plummeted with snow, like, I have no doubt in my mind, because it's proven, like, you watch their videos, there's 100 deer out in a cut cornfield. Like, those deer are out there for a reason, because they're trying to survive. But does that really apply to me in the Southeast when the temperature goes from 70 to, say, 35 or 40? Because that's a serious temperature drop. And as a hunter in the past, I've always thought a temperature drop like that is going to increase deer movement. But it's not really going to increase deer movement for the reasons Mark said it would, for enhancing their need to survive, because really that's not like 35 degrees or 40 degrees or even 45 degrees, whatever it might be. Those deer are pretty much at a comfortable level, and I don't think it's endangering them at those temperatures to where they have to get up and feed all the time. So really, I've thought more about, why does a deer move when it moves to begin with? And Mark is right. They're slave to their stomach. Deer supposedly, like, on average, will have to eat 7 pounds of food per day. That means these deer are going to have to get up and they're going to have to eat. That means during the day, like, a lot of times we talk about deer being nocturnal, like, to put in 7 pounds of food in that stomach, they're going to have to get up and they're going to have to eat at some point during the day. So really, the more and more I've thought about it, the more I've tried to put myself in the shoes or the hooves of a deer. What makes them move is really all about food, but it's what they want to eat at that time of year, and like what is good for a deer in a deer's eyes to their palate at that time of year. Is it soybean? Like, if the soybeans are still green, hey man, they're hitting the soybean. But when it turns brown, they're no longer hitting the soybean. So wherever they were moving from a safe place to feed, now they have to change that. Maybe they don't change their bedding, but they do change their food. So that may be further away and maybe closer. They may change their bedding to be closer. But we've even thought about, like, in the summertime, well, deer don't travel as far to feed because whatever reasons we give ourselves. But QDMA released that study a few years ago that was done in September, and a buck was traveling 4 miles round trip to hit a soybean field. So he was going from a place of safety to a place where he wanted and desired to eat, and then he would return back to his place of safety. So that's 4 miles round trip in the summertime of South Carolina in the heat. He did not mind moving because it was hot. I just think it all goes back to the deer's belly. Mark Drury's completely right, but I'm just not sold that if, the temperature goes from 70 degrees to 35 degrees this weekend in Tennessee, that those deer are going to be moving any sooner or any more because of that. And that's kind of where I'm at. That's like my whole summation. I just spitballed everything.
I know, man. I feel like you just blurted everything out. You had that all pent up, ready to go, man.
I've been obsessed with this over the last week. You have no idea because we haven't been able to talk, but obsessively looking at other people's views and thinking about this, and that's what I came up with.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot too. We talked about this back and forth some about, I was telling you I'd been working on this, and, we went back and forth some, and I didn't want to tell you exactly what everybody had to say because I wanted to get your initial thoughts before you heard it. So, but man, I've been thinking about this for a long, since I guess before I started doing the interviews, I was already kind of mentally debating it some. And then, of course, doing the interviews and then, kind of put it away for a little bit during turkey season and stuff, then brought all those thoughts back out again, just editing this stuff and hearing all this stuff. It's really hard to know, exactly what to believe because there's such strong feelings that they're so ingrained into hunters about watching the weather and cold weather. But it's really hard to deny all these scientific studies too.
Yeah. So saying all that, what are your thoughts right now? And has your thoughts really changed since before you started and to where we're at right now?
Okay. So, all right. Can I put that question on hold for a couple minutes? Because I have, based on your, monologue there, I have a couple questions for you.
Okay.
All right. So, but I will answer your question. All right. So, just want to bring up a counterpoint here. You mentioned how all the deer piling up in the field up north, and that being a sign of okay, it's really cold. They all need to come eat. And I don't really know the answer to this question, but I just want to pose it to you. Do you think it's possible that it's not the weather that's driving all those deer on the field? It's the fact that it's the middle of winter, and that's the only food source that's easily available. So those same deer are going to be piling out in that field, whether it's 50 degrees or whether it's 20 degrees.
I 100% believe that could be the case.
Yeah, but
could be.
I don't have an answer for sure, but I just don't know that those deer, if there's a food source available in the winter. I mean, you often hear if you have the food in late season, then you're going to draw deer from all over the place. Well, it's not because it's cold and you draw them all over. It's because it's the only food source. So. But I don't know the answer to that question. Maybe when Mark Drury's on one of his main food sources and it's, let's say it's a warm spell going through 60 degrees, does that mean the deer don't come out, in the daylight because it's 60 degrees? Or is it they're coming out at 3 o'clock because it gets dark at 5? I don't know.
Good question.
All right. So we talked about, I kind of gave you one side with, all right, deer are going to, maybe they're just moving to one source, but here's how my thought process with the whole thing goes, because I've been going back and forth so much on this. What about the other side of, what, they might not be moving a lot further, but when it's cooler, could they just be moving 15 minutes earlier, which could be the difference on seeing a mature buck 100 yards from his bed or not seeing him until after dark. He's slipping in after dark and you're missing him. Are these studies accurate enough to do that? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, let me turn this around on you. Why would a deer get up and move 15 minutes earlier? What kind of temperature swing would that take to make that deer get up and move?
Well, it just kind of feels good outside. So, I always hear Grant Woods talk about, when deer put their winter coat on, it'd be like us wearing our winter coat outside. So we wouldn't want to put a heavy jacket on and move while it's still hot outside. We'd wait till it kind of cooled off in the evening. So, could that make the difference? Or am I doing, I can't think of the right word, where we put like human emotions on animals? Do you remember what that's called?
No, it's a really big word, and I looked it up before we were actually on the podcast. So.
All right, that helps me zero. But
that helps you zero. It's out there.
Yeah, there's a word for this, guys. But
Let
anyway,
me ask you this, Mike. Oh, hold on. In South Alabama, the rut hits. It could hit anywhere from December to January, right? And those deer in Alabama would have on their winter coats at that period in time. Those deer chasing does 1 mile, 2 miles, going crazy. What's how are they surviving like that? They're not comfortable in their winter coats, right? I don't get that, man.
Like,
when
it's hot out, they don't move until the middle of the night, and especially if there's a full moon, they'll be moving all night.
Oh yeah, my bad.
Yeah,
debunked all kinds of things just then. So I don't think. I mean, it would take some like serious events. Honestly, the more I've thought about this, to make a deer get up and move 15 minutes earlier out of his bed and to that food source. A temperature dip from 70 degrees to 35 degrees, I don't think is going to make him do it. Now, if it's 40 degrees and it goes to 0 degrees, I will actually change my mind and say that, yeah, deer probably will. I think he'll get up and he'll move 15 minutes earlier.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's so hard to like piece this whole thing out. So I guess I'll share my feelings with you because I told you I was going to do that. And maybe people have like read through a little bit into what I've been thinking, but I've been trying to stay neutral in this whole thing. And honestly, I've been going back and forth a lot, especially depending on who I talk to. One thing for me is it depends on what the weather is going to be the next time I'm hunting, because I think I could really force myself to believe either way. So if it is going to be hot the next time I'm going hunting, I definitely am going to be thinking, you know what, it doesn't matter. The deer are going to need to eat, and they move the same amount every day, and I need to get out there and do my hunting. But if it's going to be a nice cold front, it's going to be, a nice 20 degree temperature drop and a, north wind, and then I'm going to be thinking, you know what, they're probably going to be moving extra today, and I need to stay extra alert. I think I could kind of go either way on that. But in my heart of hearts, what I really am thinking after going through this whole thing is I'm strongly leaning towards what the science is saying in my mind. And that is that, you know what, it doesn't matter. They're going to be moving the same amount every day, depending on the season, depending on food sources, depending on the rut, but not depending on what the weather is. So, October 31st one year is going to be very similar to October 31st the next year, regardless of whether it's raining or the moon is full or the temperature just dropped 20 degrees.
So what you're saying is, though, that if the temperature does drop, the barometric pressure rises, your confidence does go up, but it will not have any bearing on whether or not you'll step foot in the woods, because you're going to do that when you can anyways.
My forced confidence is going to be going up. I mean, I think no matter what, I guess maybe not no matter what. I think in like less than ideal hunting conditions in the traditional sense of the word, this whole series is going to help me have more confidence and stay in the stand longer, get to the stand earlier when it's hot. Just knowing that, like, hey, the deer are going to be moving, they're going to be eating either way. So I think it's going to make an impact on that. What about you? Do you see any potential impacts on the way you hunt based on the studies?
I'm kind of like you in a lot of ways. We both have really crazy lives, very hectic families. Me getting to go to hunt is such a privilege. I haven't been turning down hunts because it was getting hot anyways. I haven't been turning down hunts for any reason. Like, if I get a chance to go, I'm going. But I do think, like what Dan Infault talks a lot about, how important confidence is in the woods. I do think, like I was saying a minute ago, when that weather, the temperature drops and the weather gets crazy, my confidence level is going to go up, and that's good. That's a good thing, but it's not going to have any bearing whatsoever on when I actually step foot in the woods.
Right. I'm the same way before and after doing this. Like, I would go hunting whenever I can go hunting. It might make an impact on, okay, can I go this weekend or can I go next weekend? I've got, out of the next 2 weekends, I can squeeze a trip in. And I would say probably after listening to all this, I probably still would lean towards the cooler weekend. Not even necessarily because I think I'm going to see more deer, but maybe because it's more comfortable as a hunter.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
will say in the past though, looking at taking my kids, it's been kind of I've thinking, okay, we need to go the weekend. I had this situation, I think it was last year, where I had a couple of weekends available, and I wanted to take my kids on the cooler weekend, thinking that deer movement would be improved, and but also thinking like, man, my kids don't have all the specialty clothes and all this kind of stuff. It sure would be better to take them when it's going to be in the 50s instead of the 30s. So, but this probably is helpful in that situation. Like, you know what? I should probably take my kids when they're going to be the most comfortable and not worry about what deer movement's going to be.
That's a good thought, without a doubt.
Now, with all that said, I hear Mark Drury, who I believe is a genius when it comes to this stuff, and he's spouting off 12 different things, like specifically when this goes up, and he's got specific numbers, and I know he's looked at trail camera data. I know he's not just like making these things up off the top of his head. It's something he's really looked into and researched. He makes a really compelling case for the traditional way of thinking. And I can completely respect anybody that believes what he's saying is true, because I find it very compelling.
Yeah, who literally is going to argue with Mark Drury and the success that he's had? No one.
Right. Well, and it's certainly not me saying like I think I understand something better than Mark Drury. It's just a matter of, okay,
Yeah.
do I believe these wildlife biologists and these studies, or do I believe Mark Drury? And there's probably somewhere in between where you can figure out a way to make them both true, but I personally haven't figured out a way to do that. So that is why I'm leaning towards believing the studies. And it was Mark Kenyon said this, and he was quoting somebody else, so I don't know who the original person was. Actually, I'm not even sure he remembered, but he said something about having strong opinions but loosely held. And I really like the idea of that. I want to understand and know a lot about this topic, but if there's something new that comes out, then I'm definitely open to changing my mind and leaning that direction.
Okay, so I don't know how you could possibly go away from the science, though, because if you believe the technology is accurate enough to really tell us what we want to know, and all the studies show the same thing, then you're completely going against the grain if you don't believe the science on this. And I tend to believe that we've heard enough, that we've looked at other stuff outside of these conversations to know that that's what these studies show. So I don't know, man. Like, my confidence is definitely in the science, without a doubt. Now, that doesn't mean, again, that my opinion wouldn't change when the weather dips 20 to 30 degrees, because that's what, logically I've been going with my entire life. And that's what I'll continue to go with. But man, the science, I just don't see how it could be wrong.
Well, it would have to be something that comes out, statistically in the science realm, where it's statistically significant that points to something different. Like one of the things in the interview with Dr. Diefenbach is he talked about, bucks moved less when it was raining, but does moved a little bit more. And then when it was windier, the bucks moved a little more. And like, to me, those things were like, I think they had like a total of maybe it was 40 deer collared. And to me, like, those numbers weren't big enough for me to be like, oh, like every time it rains, then the bucks aren't going to move or what, but when you looked at those things as a whole, and you look at all the studies as a whole, I think it's like pretty compelling that the deer are not moving based on the weather.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that really stood out to me, and this was actually, so Lindsay and I kind of did a recording and kind of wrapped things up, and he was like, hey, I had something else I wanted to mention. So when he talked about the hurricane thing, to me, the fact that the changing pressure and the amount of pressure change with a hurricane did not change the amount of movement with those deer is crazy to me. Like, I would think they'd be either like moving a ton and eating, getting ready for a big storm, or they would be like hunkering down and not moving at all. But really, it was like normal rut activity, except for like probably in the heart of the storm. So I thought that was really interesting when you're talking about pressure. Like a hurricane coming through and the huge shift in pressure did not change the deer movement.
That was pretty compelling. I've read another study talking about some floodwaters coming, and some of the deer didn't even run from the fact of an impending flood coming in. Like, their movement didn't change at all, and I don't think they actually made it. I think they actually died.
Yeah, I think I've heard about those studies as well, where they'll lose a lot of GPS deer when when an area floods, because they have their home range, and I don't think it's like 100% of them always stay. Probably
No,
some
it
of it
wasn't.
has to do with like, okay, the flood's rising and there's like a way out. Then, once they're not trapped, they probably go ahead and take it.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's and the other thing is, deer are individuals. So could there be individual deer that like to move when it's colder or like to move when it's hotter? Then I would say yes, because I don't think there's any absolutes when it comes to, what we're saying individual deer are going to do. But when I look at the science of all the deer, so maybe you got you might have a farm and a big buck on it, and you notice on your trail cameras that he consistently does one thing. Well, just because a GPS study of deer in Mississippi do one thing doesn't mean that one on your farm is going to do something different. But I do think if you're going to make generalizations, you need to go with the science.
Yeah, 100%.
Well, you got anything else before we kind of wrap this whole thing up?
No, man. I've enjoyed the series. I've enjoyed listening to all the different guests that we've had. I really appreciate them taking the time to come on and to do this with you, and appreciate you not making me do any work. That's really helpful. Thank you. My wife appreciates that. And appreciate all the listeners just for the support. It's been overwhelming, and really thankful for that.
Yeah, I'm ready for the secret project you've been working on.
I don't have secret projects. You have the secret projects.
Yeah.
Yet.
Well, and the scent control study was no secret at all. But yeah, maybe in 12 months from now, year 3 of the Down South Hunting Podcast, we'll come up with something else cool to talk about. But I'm excited about getting back into our normal routine of interviewing hunters and talking ourselves about how our season's going. And we're going to be getting into that again next week. So I know you've been able to get out in the woods some, and I'm excited about talking to you some more about that. And one last thing, I do want to thank Onyx, the Onyx app and Onyx Hunt, for allowing us to do this, giving us the funding that we need to keep this thing going. They're really important to us, so I just wanted to give a quick shout out to them.
Yeah, make sure you go and download their app and do the free trial. I guarantee you'll be wanting the whole package.
Absolutely. And with that, I guess we're out down south.
Out down south.